Scholars pinpoint spot of Salem witch hangings near Walgreens. In Salem, Massachusetts, the morning of June 10, 1692, started with a hanging. Bridget Bishop was a local woman convicted of witchcraft. In truth, probably her only crimes were a tendency to gossip and inappropriate behavior, at least by the Puritan strict standards. She was escorted to a prominent spot near Salem. Her hands were bound behind her back and her legs and petticoat were tied tight. Her neck was slipped through a loop of rope tied to a tree branch, and she was placed halfway up a ladder. Then, even as Bishop protested her innocence, the ladder was kicked out from under her. The woman fell, her neck wrenched by the rope, and within a few minutes she was dead. Bishop was the first of 19 people to be hanged in this spot more than 300 years ago, during the months of paranoia and pain that were the Salem witch trials. But until this week, no one knew exactly where it was that Bishop and her fellow witches had been killed. Villagers could watch executions. It happened, as it turns out, on a wooded ledge overlooking town that could have been seen from houses in the village below. It allowed everyone in town to witness an example of what happens to people who break the law, said historian Emerson Tad Baker, a member of the Gallows Hill Project, which has identified the location of the gallows. These days, the sight of so much senseless death is dominated by something slightly less menacing than a gallows. It overlooks a Walgreens. People come to Salem from all over wanting to know where the hangings happened, said Kenneth Glover, who gives tours in Salem. Now he can tell them, if he wants to. City recognizes its grim history. The city of Salem, which has spent much of the past 3 centuries both enjoying and atoning for its grim history, plans to install a plaque at the humble spot. Authorities are also seeking funds to clean up the area and ready it for a flood of tourists. This is part of our history, said Salem Mayor Kimberly Driscoll, and this is an opportunity for us to be honest about what took place. Salem's witch trial started in January 1692, when 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris and her 11-year-old cousin Abigail Williams began having strange fits. They were the daughter and niece of Salem's minister. A doctor diagnosed the cause as supernatural, and under pressure from local officials, the girls blamed 3 local women. The hysteria was contagious, as was the girl's mysterious illness. Before long, the affliction spread to nearly a dozen girls, and more than 200 people would be accused of witchcraft. Documents unclear on location. Bishop was the first to die. According to accounts at the time, she was carted to a spot called Gallows Hill for her hanging, as were 18 other accused witches. Giles Corey, the 20th person to be executed for witchcraft, was killed by an ancient punishment called pene forte et dure, because he refused to enter a plea of guilt or innocence. Heavy stones were loaded onto his chest until he suffocated. Don't try that at home. The Salem trials and executions are among the well-recorded events in early American history, and more than 1,000 documents survive from the time, Baker said. However, none of the accounts were very specific about where the hangings happened. Pinpointing the spot where 19 Salem witches died turned out to be an investigative feat. Some believe that the men and women were hanged at the top of a hill in Salem called Gallows Hill. It was a sensible conclusion, given the name and the fact that witnesses identified the hill as the execution spot, but that hill didn't quite fit the descriptions. Good research a century earlier. So the 7-member Gallows Hill Project team, which included Baker and other Salem scholars, began combing through the documents looking for alternate sites. Their best bet was a spot near Walgreens, known locally as Proctor's Ledge. John Proctor was one of the witches killed there, and the ledge is about a quarter of a mile from Gallows Hill. That spot had first been identified more than a century earlier by lawyer and historian Sidney Purley. He must have read every deed and will in the courthouse, said author Marilyn Roach, a member of the research team. He's a very good source. The city of Salem acquired that strip of land in 1936 and called it Which memorial land, according to Baker? Radar aerial photos confirm site. But Perley's research lacked modern technology, Baker said, so there was no way to make sure that his guess was correct. The site was never formally marked. Returning to Perley's spot with ground-penetrating radar and aerial photography, the Gallows Hill Project researchers were able to map out what the ledge would have looked like 300 years ago and match it to contemporary accounts. This time they were sure they had found the right place. The discovery does not change much. There are no artifacts to be found and no buried remains because the soil was too shallow for burials, Baker said. Archaeologists couldn't even hope to uncover the remnants of a gallows, since most historians believe the witches were hanged from trees. Nevertheless, the victims of Salem's century-old hysteria will have their small plaque, and the researchers who found the site of their last breaths will have the satisfaction of a mystery solved.